$74.50. Those words hit Clara like a punch to the stomach. She stood frozen at the register, her hands trembling, clutching her worn wallet with exactly $52 inside. Behind her, the line of impatient shoppers grew. A man in a wool coat muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Some of us have actual lives to get back to." It was Christmas Eve, and she was $22 short of buying the only thing her 6-year-old son had asked Santa for. She was about to walk away in humiliation when a hand slammed down on the counter. A voice she recognized, her cold, distant billionaire boss, whispered 5 words that would change her life forever. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. Not even her. Now, before I tell you those 5 words, I need you to do something. If you've ever felt that crushing shame of not having enough, if you've ever sacrificed everything for someone you love, hit that like button right now. Drop a heart in the comments, and if you're new here, subscribe, because this channel is for people who feel deeply. Okay, let's go back to that moment, the hand on the counter, the whisper, and the 5 words that changed everything. The wind on 5th Avenue didn't just blow, it bit, tearing through the thin fabric of Clara's coat like a cruel reminder of everything she couldn't afford. It was 6 o'clock on Christmas Eve, the absolute worst time to be alive in the city if you were poor, tired, and desperate. The streets were a blur of red taillights and white snow, a chaotic symphony of honking taxis and frantic last-minute shoppers. Everyone seemed to be running toward warmth, toward families waiting with roasted turkeys and piles of gifts. Everyone except Clara. She was running toward a miracle, or at least, she was praying for one. She clutched her purse tightly against her side, her knuckles white from the cold and the tension. Inside that worn leather bag sat her entire life's savings, or rather, the savings she had managed to scrape together over the last 4 weeks. Clara was an executive assistant at Thorne Enterprises, a job that sounded prestigious on paper but paid just enough to keep her above the poverty line in a city designed to crush anyone without a trust fund. Her boss, Julian Thorne, was less of a man and more of a force of nature. He was a billionaire who viewed Christmas not as a holiday, but as a fiscal quarter deadline that inconvenienced his schedule. To him, Clara was invisible. She was a pair of hands that placed black coffee on his desk at 7 a.m. sharp, a silhouette that filed contracts in silence, and a ghost that vanished when the work was done. He didn't know she had a son. He didn't know she had skipped lunch every single day for the past month, drinking tap water to stave off the hunger pangs, just to save exactly $45. That was the magic number, $45. That was the price of the Silver Centurion, a robot toy that could walk, talk, and supposedly protect a child from closet monsters. It was the only thing her 6-year-old son, Leo, had asked for. He hadn't asked for a bike or a video game console. He had drawn a picture of the robot with crayons, his big eyes wide with hope, and whispered, "Santa knows where to find it, right, Mommy?" The memory of Leo's voice pushed Clara forward, cutting through the icy wind. She couldn't disappoint him. Not this year. This had been the hardest year of their lives. After her husband left, disappearing into the night with their bank account details and leaving behind nothing but debt, Clara had fought tooth and nail to keep a roof over their heads. The robot wasn't just a toy, it was a promise. It was proof that despite the long hours, the empty fridge, and the cold apartment, she was still a good mother. She could still make magic happen. She reached the toy store, a glowing palace of consumerism that smelled of cinnamon and desperation. The automatic doors slid open, blasting her with dry heat and the deafening sound of 1,000 electronic beeps. It was madness. Parents were wrestling over the last board games. Toddlers were screaming in the aisles. Panic flared in Clara's chest. The shelves looked picked over, like carcasses left by vultures. She sprinted toward aisle 4, her heart hammering against her ribs. Empty. The spot where the robots usually sat was a gaping hole of bare metal shelving. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sudden. "No," she whispered, the sound lost in the cacophony. "Please, no." She fell to her knees, frantically shifting aside a pile of unwanted plush bears on the bottom shelf. And then she saw it, a glint of silver chrome. One box. The last silver centurion was shoved all the way to the back, likely hidden by another desperate parent who had forgotten to come back for it. A sob of relief escaped her throat. She grabbed the box, hugging it to her chest like a lifeline. It felt heavy and solid. It felt like victory. She joined the checkout line, which snaked around the store. She didn't mind the wait. She had the prize. She spent 20 minutes in line mentally calculating her budget again. $45 for the toy. She had $52 in her wallet. That left $7 for bus fare and maybe a small carton of eggnog to share with Leo. It was going to be perfect. When she finally reached the counter, the cashier, a teenage girl with tired eyes and a crooked Santa hat, didn't even look up. She grabbed the box from Clara's hands and passed it over the scanner. Beep. Clara reached for her wallet, a smile finally touching her lips. Cash, please. That'll be $74.50. The girl droned, popping her gum. Clara froze. Her hand stopped halfway to the bills. The smile died instantly. I think there's a mistake, Clara stammered, her voice trembling. The shelf said 45. It's always been 45. The girl pointed a bored finger at a small, handwritten sign taped to the register. Holiday demand pricing in effect for last-minute items. It's a surge price, the girl said, looking at her fingernails. The computer does it automatically. Do you want it or not? The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Clara stared at the digital display. $74. She looked into her wallet. The crumpled bills mocked her. She had 52. She was short by over $20. $20 might as well have been $1 million. She didn't have a credit card. They were all maxed out or cancelled. Clara's voice cracked. She felt the eyes of the people behind her burning into her back. A man in a wool coat sighed loudly. A woman checked her watch and tooted. I only have 52. Then you can't buy it, the girl said, her hand already moving to shove the robot aside. Next. Wait, Clara pleaded, grabbing the edge of the counter. Her dignity was crumbling, turning into ash in her mouth. Please, it's for my son. It's the only thing he wants. I can bring the rest on Tuesday? I work just down the street at Thorn Enterprises. Please. Store policy, the girl snapped. If you can't pay, you can't play. Move it, lady. You're holding up the line. The humiliation was a physical blow, hot and sharp. Clara looked at the silver robot, imagining Leo's face when he woke up to nothing. The failure was absolute. She was the woman who couldn't even buy a toy. Slowly, with shaking hands, she let go of the counter. She had to put it back. She had to walk away. The sound of the robot sliding across the countertop was the loudest noise in the world. It was the sound of a promise breaking, a harsh scrape of cardboard against laminate that signaled the end of Clara's fight. Her cheeks burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the stifling air of the shop and everything to do with the shame that was currently swallowing her whole. She kept her eyes down, unable to look at the teenage cashier, unable to face the impatient customers behind her who were already shuffling forward, eager to fill the space she was vacating. She was a waste of their time. She was an obstacle. She was just a woman who couldn't afford to be a mother today. Finally, the man in the wool coat behind her muttered, the word dripping with disdain. Some of us have actual lives to get back to. Clara's fingers lingered on the corner of the box for one desperate, agonizing second longer. She wanted to scream. She wanted to beg. But she knew it was useless. The world didn't run on mercy. It ran on $74.50. She took a ragged breath, preparing to turn around and walk the gauntlet of judgment back to the door, back to the cold, back to an empty Christmas tree. She began to pull her hand away. And then, the motion stopped. A hand, large and encased in soft, black leather, slammed down on top of the box. It wasn't a violent slam, but it was authoritative and final. It pinned the toy to the counter with an immovable weight. Keep scanning, a voice said. Clara froze. The voice was low, baritone, and terrifyingly familiar. It was a voice she heard every day through the intercom of her office, usually demanding files or canceling meetings. It was a voice that commanded boardrooms and silenced shareholders. But here, In a discount toy store on Christmas Eve, it sounded out of place, like a lion roaring in a library. Slowly, terrified of what she would see, Clara looked up. Standing beside her was Julian Thorne. But it wasn't the Julian Thorne she knew. The impeccable, armor-like Italian suits were gone. In their place, he wore a heavy, long black wool coat with the collar turned up against the wind. Snowflakes clung to his dark hair, melting into droplets that ran down a face etched with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He didn't look like the titan of industry who ate competitors for breakfast. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His jaw was set tight, a muscle ticking in his cheek as he stared down the cashier. The transformation in the girl behind the counter was instantaneous and nauseating. The gum-popping boredom vanished, replaced by wide-eyed, trembling recognition. You didn't have to know business to know Julian Thorne. His face was on the cover of magazines. His last name was plastered on the skyscrapers visible through the shop window. He radiated a kind of wealth that made the air around him feel expensive. "And Mr. Thorne," the girl squeaked, her hands shaking as she reached for the scanner gun again. I was just... You were just explaining store policy," Julian said, his voice smooth and deadly calm. "I heard. Surge pricing. A fascinating concept." He reached into his coat pocket and produced a sleek, black titanium card. He didn't hand it to the girl. He placed it on the counter with 2 fingers, sliding it forward until it rested next to the robot. "Charge it, and add a $200 tip for yourself." The girl's jaw dropped. "Sir? Consider it a tuition fee," Julian said, his eyes cold and hard as flint. "Use the money to buy yourself some manners. Next time a mother is counting pennies for her child, you will wait with patience. Do you understand?" "Yes," the girl whispered, her face pale. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." The transaction took seconds. The machine beeped, a receipt printed, and the robot was shoved into a large festive bag. The hostile crowd behind them had fallen dead silent. The man in the wool coat who had complained earlier was now pretending to be very interested in a display of candy canes, shrinking away from Julian's presence. Julian picked up the bag. He didn't hand it to Clara immediately. Instead, he turned to her. The anger that had been directed at the cashier evaporated, leaving behind something softer, something confusingly intimate. He stepped into her personal space, blocking out the rest of the store, blocking out the staring eyes. He smelled of cold winter air, expensive cedarwood, and something sharp, like scotch. He leaned down, lowering his head until his lips were inches from her ear. Clara held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She expected a reprimand. She expected him to ask why she was shopping at the last minute, or why she hadn't managed her finances better. She expected the boss. Instead, his warm breath tickled her skin as he whispered the words that would change her life. "Put it on my tab, and come with me." Clara blinked, pulling back slightly to look at him. Her mind couldn't process the command. "What? Mr. Thorne, I can't." She reached for the bag, her fingers brushing against his glove. "I have to get home. My son is at the babysitter's. She charges by the hour, and I'm already late. I can't work tonight. Please." She was terrified he was going to fire her, that he had followed her here to demand she return to the office to fix a spreadsheet. But Julian didn't let go of the bag. He didn't straighten up to his full, imposing height. Instead, his shoulders slumped, just a fraction. For the first time in the 3 years she had worked for him, the mask slipped. The cold, unfeeling billionaire vanished, and in his place stood a man who looked haunted. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were swimming with a quiet desperation. "I'm not asking you to work, Clara," he said, his voice dropping so low that only she could hear him over the festive music blaring from the speakers. "I don't need an assistant tonight. I don't need a secretary." He glanced toward the snowy street outside, then back at her, his gaze intense and searching. "I need a witness," he said. The vulnerability in his voice was shocking, like finding a crack in a diamond. "I have to go to my family's estate. If I walk in there alone, they will eat me alive. Please, just be there." Clara stared at him. This wasn't a command. It was a plea. The most powerful man she knew was begging her for help. The confusion swirled in her head. The babysitter, the robot, the snow, the strange request, but the look in his eyes anchored her. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "My car is outside," Julian said softly. Before she could form a rational argument, before she could list the 10 reasons why this was a terrible idea, Julian turned and walked toward the exit, carrying Leo's robot as if it were a briefcase of gold bullion. And Clara, bewildered and pulled by a gravity she couldn't name, followed him out into the night. The door of the limousine closed with a heavy, pressurized thud, instantly sealing off the noise of New York City. The chaotic honking and the slushy streets vanished, replaced by the hushed, leather-scented silence of Julian Thorne's private world. It was warm inside, a climate-controlled sanctuary that felt miles away from the freezing sidewalk Clara had been standing on just moments ago. Julian sat across from her, placing the bag with the robot toy carefully on the seat next to him. He didn't look at her immediately. He stared out the tinted window, watching the city blur into streaks of festive light. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, the knuckles straining against the skin. "I apologize for the ambiguity back there," Julian said, his voice devoid of its usual clipped, professional cadence. He sounded weary. "But if I had asked you in the office, you would have said no?" "I'm saying no now, Mr. Thorne," Clara said, finding her voice despite the intimidation of the luxury surrounding her. She sat on the edge of the plush leather seat, clutching her purse. "I can't go anywhere with you. It's Christmas Eve. My son is waiting for me. He's 6 years old. I can't just abandon him to go to a party." Julian turned his head slowly. The shadows from the streetlights played across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the hollowness under his eyes. "It's not a party, Clara. It's a sentencing hearing with cocktails." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, bridging the gap between them. "I'm on my way to the Thorne estate. The annual gala. My mother, my brother, the board of directors. They will all be there." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "They don't want to see me. They want to inspect their investment. They want to pick apart my life, my choices, and my solitude. Every year, I walk in there, and every year they strip me down until I feel like nothing more than a bank account with a pulse." Clara watched him, stunned. She had always assumed Julian's life was perfect. He was the golden boy, the billionaire heir. To hear him describe his family with such dread was jarring. "So why go?" she asked softly. "Because if I don't, they threaten the company," Julian said simply. "But I can't do it alone this time. I can't sit there and let them tear at me without an anchor. I need a buffer. I need someone real in the room. Someone who doesn't look at me and see dollar signs." He looked at her then, his gaze piercing. "You're the most real person I know, Clara. I watch you work. I watch you handle crises with grace while I'm losing my mind. You have a spine of steel. I need to borrow that spine for 3 hours." Clara felt a flush rise to her cheeks at the unexpected praise, but she shook her head. "I appreciate that, sir. I really do. But my answer hasn't changed. My spine belongs to my son tonight. He's at a babysitter's apartment that smells like boiled cabbage, waiting for his mom to come home and make Christmas magic out of nothing. I can't leave him." She reached for the door handle, though the car was moving. "Please, tell the driver to pull over. I need to get back to him." "Bring him," Julian said. The words hung in the air, suspended in the silence. Clara paused, her hand hovering over the latch. "What?" "Bring the boy," Julian repeated, the idea seeming to take hold of him as he spoke. He sat up straighter, a spark of energy returning to his eyes. "Bring Leo. We'll pick him up right now. The estate is huge, Clara. It's a fortress. We have the biggest Christmas tree in the city, 20 feet tall, imported from Norway. We have a chef who can make anything a kid could dream of. There are acres of untouched snow for sledding." He gestured to the bag on the seat. "You fought for that robot because you wanted to give him a good Christmas. Let me help you give him a great one. Let him have the tree, the food, and the magic. Let him run wild in a mansion while you help me survive dinner." Clara stared at him, her mind racing. She thought of her small, drafty apartment with the radiator that hissed and clanked all night. She thought of the tiny, plastic tree she had bought at the pharmacy, the one that leaned crookedly to the left. She thought of Leo, who had never seen a real fireplace and who thought boxed mac and cheese was a holiday treat. "You want to bring a 6-year-old to a black-tie gala?" Clara asked, skepticism warring with temptation. "I want to bring a distraction," Julian corrected, though there was a softness in his tone that betrayed him. "And I want to give you something in return for your help. Please. It's just for tonight. I'll have a car take you both home the second you want to leave. I swear." Clara looked at the cheap cardboard box of the silver Centurion sitting on the expensive leather. Then she looked at Julian. For the first time, she saw the boy inside the man, the boy who had grown up in that cold, big house and hated it. He was offering her son the fantasy he had never been allowed to enjoy. She thought of Leo's face, the wonder he would feel. And if she was being honest, she thought of the overtime pay she might be able to negotiate later. Money that could buy him new shoes for school. "Okay," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Okay. But if anyone treats him badly, if anyone looks at him the wrong way, we leave. Immediately." "Deal," Julian said, and the relief that washed over his face was profound. He tapped the partition glass. "Driver, change of destination. We're making a stop in Queens." 30 minutes later, the limousine pulled up to the crumbling brick building where Clara's babysitter lived. When Clara walked out holding the hand of a sleepy, confused Leo, the boy stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes, round and dark like his mother's, went wide as saucers as he saw the long, sleek black car purring at the curb. Is that the Batmobile?" Leo whispered, tugging on Clara's coat. Clara smiled, squeezing his hand. "Close, baby. It's Mr. Thorne's car." The driver opened the door, and Leo scrambled inside, his mouth hanging open as he touched the velvet upholstery. Julian was waiting. He didn't look annoyed by the delay or the worn-out sneakers Leo was wearing. He looked welcomed. He shifted over, making room for the small boy between them. "Hello, Leo," Julian said gravely, extending a hand as if Leo were a business associate. "I'm Julian. I hear you like robots." Leo shook the big hand with both of his small ones, nodding vigorously. "I like them a lot. Are you a spy?" "Something like that," Julian murmured, glancing at Clara with the ghost of a smile. "Tonight we're on a mission. Think you can handle it?" "Yes," Leo chirped, bouncing on the seat. As the car pulled away from the curb and headed toward the snow-covered hills of the Thorne estate, Clara watched the city lights fade behind them. She felt a strange tightening in her chest. She was walking into the lion's den, armed only with a toy robot and a 6-year-old boy, to protect the most powerful man in the city. It was madness, but as she looked at Leo's beaming face, reflecting the passing streetlights, she knew she couldn't have said no. The Thorne estate didn't look like a home. It looked like a monument to cold, unyielding power. As the limousine crunched up the long, winding gravel driveway, massive iron gates parted slowly, revealing a sprawling stone mansion illuminated by harsh, white floodlights. The snow here was pristine, untouched by the soot and grime of the city, glowing eerily under the moon. Tall, skeletal trees lined the path, their branches heavy with ice, standing like silent sentinels guarding a fortress. "Whoa!" Leo breathed, his nose pressed against the glass, leaving a small fog of condensation. "Is a king living here?" "No," Julian replied, his voice tightening as the car came to a halt. "Just people who think they are." The driver opened the door, and the biting wind greeted them instantly. Clara pulled Leo's scarf tighter around his neck, double-checking that his mismatched mittens were secure. She felt painfully underdressed in her office trousers and wool coat, which had seen better days. Next to the imposing architecture of the estate, she felt small, fragile, and utterly out of place. They ascended the grand stone steps, Julian leading the way. His posture had changed the moment they crossed the property line. The vulnerability she had seen in the car was gone, replaced by a rigid, armor-like tension. He was bracing for impact. The massive oak doors swung open, revealed by a butler who looked more like a statue than a man. They stepped into the grand hall. The space was breathtaking and terrifying. The ceiling soared 30 feet high, dripping with crystal chandeliers that cast a prismatic, freezing light over the marble floors. In the center stood the tree Julian had promised, a 20-foot spruce, decorated with ornaments that likely cost more than Clara's annual salary. But despite the grandeur, the room felt dead. There was no smell of pine or cookies, no warmth from the massive stone fireplace, which stood dark and empty. It was a museum, not a living room. Waiting for them at the base of the staircase stood the reception committee, Julian's mother, Eleanor Thorne, and his brother, Sebastian. Eleanor was a striking woman, sharp and angular, draped in silver silk that matched her icy hair. Sebastian, leaning casually against a pillar, swirled a glass of amber liquid, a smirk playing on his lips. They were beautiful, polished, and terrifyingly silent. As Clara walked in, holding Leo's hand, the silence stretched, turning thick and suffocating. The squeak of Leo's worn-out, wet sneakers on the polished marble echoed through the cavernous hall like a gunshot. Eleanor's gaze swept over Clara, dissecting her from her messy bun to her scuffed boots. It was a look of pure, distilled judgment. Her eyes lingered for a fraction of a second on Leo, widening slightly in distaste, before snapping to Julian. "Julian," Eleanor said, her voice smooth and cold as glass. "You're late. And I see you've brought help. Is the staff entrance broken?" Clara felt the insult land like a slap. She instinctively pulled Leo closer to her leg, her face burning. She opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, to retreat, but she never got the chance. Julian moved. He didn't step away from her, he stepped to her. In a fluid motion, he positioned himself between Clara and his mother, shielding her from the older woman's gaze. He reached out and placed his hand firmly on the small of Clara's back. The touch was warm, solid, and possessive. It wasn't the touch of a boss guiding an employee. It was the touch of a partner staking a claim. "Clara is not the help, Mother," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a quiet, dangerous intensity. "She is my executive assistant, the only reason my company hasn't burned to the ground, and tonight she is my guest of honor. You will treat her with the same respect you would treat the Prime Minister. Do I make myself clear?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sebastian stopped swirling his drink. Eleanor blinked, her composure cracking for the first time. Julian had never spoken to her like that. At the office, Julian was demanding and distant, but here, in the face of his family's cruelty, he was a wall of protective fire. Clara looked up at him, breathless. She saw the tension in his jaw and the white-knuckle grip of his other hand at his side. He was terrified, she realized. Standing up to them terrified him. But he was doing it for her. And this, Julian continued, gesturing to the small boy peering out from behind Clara's coat, "is Leo. He is also my guest." Eleanor's lips thinned into a razor-sharp line. "A child, in a house full of Ming vases. How quaint." Leo, blissfully unaware of the venom in the air, let go of Clara's hand. He took 2 steps forward, his eyes fixed on the formidable woman in the silver dress. To him, she wasn't a socialite dragon. She was just a grandma. "Hi," Leo said, his voice bright and chirpy in the tomb-like hall. He tilted his head, looking up at her. "Your house is really big. Does Santa know the gate code? Because if he doesn't, he can't bring presents. And my mom said he's coming tonight." The question hung in the air, innocent and devastating. Sebastian let out a short, bark-like laugh. Eleanor looked down at the boy as if he had spoken in tongues. For a second, Clara thought she might scream. "I'm sure Santa has his ways," Julian interjected smoothly, stepping in before his mother could shatter the boy's spirit. "Come, dinner is served in the dining room, and I believe the chef has prepared something other than raw ambition." He guided Clara and Leo forward, his hand never leaving her back. As they passed his stunned family, Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. They had won the skirmish, but the war was just beginning. She was walking into a dinner with wolves, and her only shield was the man who had just declared her his equal. The dining room was a cavern of mahogany and velvet, illuminated by the cold shimmer of silver candelabras. The table was long enough to seat 20, but only 5 places were set, spaced so far apart that conversation required effort. The silence was punctuated only by the aggressive clink of silverware against fine china, a sound that felt like small acts of violence in the heavy air. Clara sat across from Julian, with Leo perched on a chair beside her that was too big for him. His small legs dangled, swinging back and forth, the rubber soles of his sneakers occasionally scuffing the antique wood. He was happily dissecting a bread roll, oblivious to the fact that he was currently the subject of a silent, hostile investigation by the man at the head of the table. Sebastian Thorne, Julian's older brother, hadn't eaten a bite. He was leaning back, swirling a glass of deep red wine, his eyes fixed on Clara with a predator's lazy focus. He was handsome in a cruel, sharp way, like a knife that had been polished until it gleamed. "So," Sebastian drawled, his voice carrying effortlessly across the expanse of white linen. "Clara. Is it just Clara? Or is there a hyphenated last name hiding somewhere? A pedigree we should be aware of?" Clara placed her fork down gently. "Just Clara, Mr. Thorne. My last name is Evans." "Evans," Sebastian repeated, tasting the name and finding it bland. "Come on. Sturdy. And the father? Is there a Mr. Evans in the picture, or is little Leo here a solo production?" The air in the room vanished. Julian froze, his knife hovering over his steak. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the handle. He opened his mouth, a retort already forming on his lips, sharp and defensive, but Clara beat him to it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flush with shame. She simply wiped the corner of Leo's mouth with a napkin and turned her gaze directly to Sebastian. Her eyes were calm, dark, and steady. "Leo's father chose a different path," Clara said, her voice clear and unwavering. "Which means I have the privilege of being both mother and father. It means I work twice as hard, sleep half as much, and love him with the strength of 2 parents. It's not a deficit, Mr. Thorne. It's a surplus. Everything I have I built. Everything I am I earned. I don't have a pedigree, but I have something far more valuable. I have resilience." She paused, letting the words settle over the table like a heavy blanket. "And I suspect that is something money cannot buy, no matter how much of it you have." Sebastian blinked. His smirk faltered, just for a second. He had expected her to crumble, to stutter, to look at the floor. He hadn't expected steel. Julian stared at her. He had completely forgotten his food. He was looking at Clara as if he were seeing her for the first time. He knew she was efficient. He knew she was organized, but he didn't know she was magnificent. In a room full of people who measured worth in stocks and bonds, she was the richest person at the table. Her dignity was a bright, burning light that made his family's pretension look cheap. Under the table, a small thump broke Julian's trance. Leo, swinging his legs with renewed vigor as he chewed on a piece of turkey, had accidentally kicked Julian in the shin. Leo froze, his eyes going wide. He dropped his fork. "Oops," he whispered, looking terrified. Julian looked down at the boy. In any other setting, a child kicking a billionaire under the table would result in a scolding or a removal. But Julian just smiled, a real, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Slowly, conspiringly, Julian reached for the basket of warm, crusty rolls in the center of the table. He palmed one, glancing left and right as if he were stealing the crown jewels, and then slid it across the tablecloth toward Leo. "Hazard pay," Julian whispered, winking. Leo giggled, snatching the roll and hiding it on his plate. It was a small moment, invisible to everyone else, but it forged a bond instantly. The powerful CEO and the 6-year-old boy were now allies in this stuffy, suffocating room. Just as the tension seemed to settle into a manageable simmer, the room plunged into chaos. It started with a flicker. The massive crystal chandelier above them buzzed, the lights dipping low, then surging bright, then dying completely. Click, hum, silence. The room went pitch black. "What on earth?" Eleanor's voice rang out, sharp and panicked in the dark. "Sebastian? Julian? It's the storm." Julian's voice came from the darkness, calm but tense. "The lines must be down. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, a ferocious gale battering the estate. A flash of lightning illuminated the room for a split second, a ghostly blue snapshot of confusion. Eleanor was clutching her pearls. Sebastian was standing up, knocking over his wine glass. The staff, usually invisible shadows, were now murmuring in panic near the kitchen doors. Without the electronic systems, the smart house was dead. The heating vents stopped humming. The security pads beeped a dying warning. "I can't see!" Eleanor cried out, her voice rising in hysteria. "Where are the candles? Someone get the generator! Why isn't it working?" "The generator is automated," Sebastian snapped. "If the system is down, it won't trigger. We're sitting ducks. Everyone stay calm," Julian said, standing up. "I'll go check the breaker." "No!" A soft voice cut through the panic. A small beam of light sliced through the darkness. Clara was standing, holding her phone flashlight aloft. It wasn't much, but in the oppressive blackness, it was a beacon. "The breaker won't help if the lines are down, and wandering around a dark house is dangerous," Clara said, her voice projecting with the same authority she used to organize board meetings. "We need heat. The temperature is going to drop fast in a house this size. Everyone needs to move to the library. It has a wood-burning fireplace. Does anyone know where the matches are?" Silence. The billionaires had no idea. "Kitchen drawer, third from the left," Clara answered her own question. She moved toward the terrified staff. "You there, grab the blankets from the linen closet. Julian, grab the wine. Sebastian, help your mother. We're moving." She didn't ask for permission. She gave orders. And in the face of their helplessness, the Thorne family did the only thing they could do. They obeyed the secretary. The library was a vast, circular room lined with books that had likely never been opened. It smelled of old paper and neglect, but tonight, it was the only source of life in the freezing mausoleum of the Thorne estate. The storm raged outside, battering the tall windows with sleet and fury, but inside, a massive fire roared in the stone hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against the shelves. Clara moved with efficient grace, transforming the space from a cold archive into a survival bunker. She had directed the staff to bring every duvet and throw blanket in the house, creating a nest of velvet and down on the Persian rug in front of the fire. The hierarchy of the dinner table had dissolved. Here, in the flickering orange light, titles didn't matter. Warmth mattered. Eleanor sat in a wingback chair pulled close to the flames, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, staring into the fire with a glazed, stunned expression. Sebastian had paced for 20 minutes, complaining about the lack of cell service, before collapsing on a sofa with a bottle of brandy, drifting into a sullen, drunken doze. That left Clara, Leo, and Julian on the floor. "Okay, watch closely," Clara whispered, handing a long metal skewer to Julian. Julian Thorne, who could negotiate multi-billion-dollar mergers in his sleep, looked at the skewer with genuine perplexity. On the end of it sat a fluffy, white marshmallow, contraband Leo had produced from his pockets with a triumphant grin. "You have to rotate it," Clara instructed, her voice soft and teasing. "If you hold it still, it catches fire. You want golden brown, not charcoal." Julian leaned forward, his face illuminated by the glow of the embers. He looked younger in this light. The harsh lines of stress around his eyes had softened. He turned the skewer slowly, his concentration intense, as if this were the most critical task of his career. "Like this?" he asked. "Perfect," Leo chirped, sitting cross-legged between them, his face smeared with sticky sugar. "You're a natural, Mr. Julian. But don't let it drop. That's the tragic zone." Julian chuckled, a low rumble of a sound that seemed to surprise even him. "The tragic zone. I'll keep that in mind." Clara watched him. It was disorienting to see him like this. He was sitting on the floor in his dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, tie discarded somewhere in the dark. He wasn't the boss. He was just a man trying to roast a marshmallow for her son. The cold, impenetrable armor he wore at the office had melted away in the heat of the fire. Leo, satisfied with his sugar intake, yawned widely. He curled up on a pile of cushions, clutching his new robot toy, still in its box, and within minutes, His breathing evened out into the deep, rhythmic sleep of childhood. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was intimate. The only sounds were the crackle of the wood and the wind howling uselessly against the glass. Clara and Julian sat shoulder to shoulder, staring into the flames. The physical distance between them had shrunk to inches. She could feel the heat radiating from his arm. "I haven't done this since I was 5, Julian said quietly, breaking the silence. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the fire. "Actually, I don't think I've ever done this. We didn't roast marshmallows. We had catered desserts." "You missed out," Clara said softly. "Burnt sugar is a food group." Julian smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. His gaze drifted to the sleeping form of his mother in the chair, then to the empty space above the mantelpiece where a portrait used to hang. "I hate Christmas," he whispered. The confession hung in the air, fragile and sharp. Clara turned to him. "Why?" "It's the anniversary," he said. He took a breath, as if the words physically hurt him. "My father left on Christmas Eve. He didn't say goodbye. He just packed a bag while we were opening presents and walked out the front door. I sat by the window for 3 days waiting for him to come back. He never did." He looked down at his hands, twisting the signet ring on his finger. "This house, it's not a home, Clara. It's a museum of everything we lost. Every Christmas, we come back here, and we pretend. We dress up, we eat expensive food, and we pretend we aren't broken. But the cold, it never leaves, no matter how high we turn up the heat." Clara's heart ached for him. She saw the lonely boy sitting by the window, waiting for a car that would never arrive. She realized then that his wealth was just insulation, a layer of protection against a world that had abandoned him when he was most vulnerable. Without thinking, she reached out. Her hand covered his. His skin was warm, his fingers startled by the contact, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers, gripping her tightly as if she were the only solid thing in the universe. "Home isn't a place, Julian," she whispered, her thumb brushing over his knuckles. "It's not stone walls or expensive trees. Home is the people who make you feel safe. It's where you don't have to pretend." Julian turned to look at her. His eyes were dark, searching, and filled with a raw intensity that made her breath hitch. In the firelight, stripped of his power and his pretense, he looked at her not as an employee, but as a salvation. "I don't feel safe anywhere," he admitted, his voice barely a rasp. "Except, maybe right now." The admission hung between them, charged and electric. The air in the library seemed to thicken, the world narrowing down to just the two of them and the space where their hands were joined. "Then stay here," Clara said softly. "In this moment. Just for tonight." Julian nodded slowly. He didn't let go of her hand. They sat there in silence, watching the fire turn to embers, while the storm raged on outside, unable to touch the fragile, new warmth growing between them. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed once, a lonely, hollow sound that signaled 1 o'clock in the morning. The fire had settled into a bed of glowing coals, casting a deep, amber light across the library. Eleanor was snoring softly in the wingback chair, and Sebastian had long since wandered off to pass out in a guest room. Leo was still curled on the rug, breathing deeply, his small hand twitching in his sleep as if he were dreaming of catching snowflakes. Clara shifted, her legs stiff from sitting on the floor. Her eyes landed on the festive bag sitting near the sofa. The Silver Centurion. In the chaos of the evening, she had forgotten the main mission. Leo couldn't wake up on Christmas morning to a robot trapped in its packaging. Quietly, trying not to disturb the peace, she reached for the bag and pulled out the box. She began to pick at the tape with her fingernail. "He can't play with it if it's in the box," a voice murmured. Clara jumped slightly, looking up. Julian was watching her. He hadn't moved from his spot beside her, his long legs stretched out on the rug. He looked relaxed, his tie completely gone now, the top buttons of his shirt undone. "I need to put the batteries in," Clara whispered back. "But I don't have a screwdriver. And I doubt this library has a toolkit." Julian smirked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy silver object. It was a butter knife he must have pocketed from the dinner table during the blackout. Improvise, adapt, overcome, he said, holding it up like a trophy. Clara stifled a laugh. You stole the silverware, Mr. Thorne? I borrowed it for essential engineering purposes, he corrected, shuffling closer to her. Here. Let me see. They sat together on the priceless Persian rug, heads bent over the cheap plastic toy. The contrast was absurd. A billionaire using a sterling silver knife to pry open a $20 robot for a receptionist's son. Julian held the robot steady while Clara tried to wedge the tip of the knife into the tiny screw. Careful, Julian whispered, his breath warm against her cheek. Don't strip the screw. These things are made of cheese. I'm trying, Clara hissed back, giggling. Your hands are in the way. My hands are stabilizing the patient, he retorted. Their fingers brushed constantly. Every accidental touch sent a jolt of electricity through Clara's veins, sharp and undeniable. It wasn't the cold, professional distance of the office. It was warm. It was human. She could smell the soap on his skin and see the dark stubble shadowing his jaw. Finally, the screw gave way. Clara popped the compartment open. Batteries? Julian produced a pack of AA batteries from his pocket. Another item scavenged during the blackout chaos. I raided the TV remote in the den, he confessed. They worked in tandem, slotting the batteries in with a satisfying click. When Clara flipped the switch, the robot's eyes lit up red, and it let out a mechanical whir. Silver Centurion online, the toy announced in a tinny, robotic voice. Sure, Clara and Julian hissed in unison, scrambling to muffle the speaker with their hands before it could wake Leo. They looked at each other over the head of the plastic robot, their hands piled together, pressing down on the speaker. A bubble of laughter rose in Clara's chest, but it died in her throat as she met Julian's eyes. The laughter faded into something else, something heavier. Julian didn't pull his hand away. He looked at her, really looked at her, in a way he never had before. He looked at the stray curl of hair falling over her forehead, the softness of her mouth, and the fierce, quiet strength in her eyes. He was enchanted. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted things from him, people who played games. But Clara, she was just sitting on the floor, fixing a toy for her son, asking for nothing. She was pure. You're incredible, Julian whispered. The words were not a compliment, they were a realization. How do you do it? How do you keep going when the world makes it so hard? I don't have a choice, Clara whispered back, her heart pounding. I love him. That makes it easy. Julian's gaze dropped to her lips. The air between them crackled. The world outside, the storm, the money, the cruelty of his family, ceased to exist. There was only the firelight and the pull of gravity drawing them together. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Clara didn't move. She couldn't. She wanted this. She wanted the man who stole butter knives and roasted marshmallows. His face was inches from hers. She could feel the heat radiating from him. His eyes flickered to her lips again, dark with desire and hesitation. He raised a hand, his fingers grazing her jawline, his touch feather-light. But then he stopped. He pulled back, just an inch, a pained expression crossing his face. He looked at the sleeping boy, then back at Clara. He seemed terrified that if he kissed her, he would break the spell, that he would ruin the one pure thing he had found in this house. I don't want this night to end, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I don't want the sun to come up. If the power comes back, the magic goes away. We go back to being boss and assistant, and I don't think I can do that anymore. Clara's breath hitched. Julian! FZZZT. A loud buzz cut through the silence. Suddenly, aggressively, the overhead chandelier blazed to life. The lamps in the corners snapped on, flooding the room with harsh, artificial yellow light. The hum of the heating system roared back into existence. The library was no longer a fortress. It was just a room. The shadows vanished, and with them, the intimacy. Julian flinched, pulling his hand away from her face as if burned. He sat back, blinking in the glare, his expression closing off instantly. The vulnerability slammed shut behind a wall of sudden, cold reality. Clara sat there, clutching the robot, feeling the loss of the darkness like a physical blow. The morning was coming, and the magic was gone. The harsh light of Christmas morning did not bring joy. It brought clarity, sharp and unforgiving. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a brilliant, blinding blue, but inside the Thorne estate, the atmosphere had returned to absolute zero. The warmth of the fire was gone, replaced by the sterile hum of the central heating and the stiff, formal silence that governed the house. Clara woke with a crick in her neck, still curled on the rug. Leo was already awake, quietly zooming his new robot across the intricate patterns of the carpet. For a moment, watching him, she smiled. But then she looked up and saw the rest of the room. Eleanor Thorne was awake. She was standing by the window, her posture rigid, her silver dress miraculously unwrinkled. She looked as if the previous night's vulnerability had never happened. The panic, the huddling for warmth, it had all been erased. Julian was standing near the door, buttoning a fresh shirt he must have retrieved from his room. He looked tired, his face drawn tight. The soft, playful man from the night before was gone. The CEO was back. "Julian!" Eleanor's voice cut through the room, sharp enough to draw blood. She didn't whisper. She didn't care who heard. A word. She beckoned him into the hallway, but she left the heavy double doors wide open. Clara, still gathering the blankets, froze. She couldn't help but hear. "That was quite the display last night," Eleanor said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Marshmallows. Sleeping on the floor. It was practically bohemian. It was survival, Mother," Julian replied, his voice flat. "It was undignified," she snapped. "And don't think I didn't see the way you were looking at her. That girl. Help. Her name is Clara," Julian said, though his voice sounded weary, not fighting. "I don't care what her name is," Eleanor hissed. "She is a charity case, Julian. A temporary distraction. Do not mistake a moment of crisis for a connection. You are a Thorne. You have responsibilities and a reputation. Do not embarrass this family by getting attached to someone who is clearly just looking for a payout." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She stood paralyzed, clutching a duvet to her chest. "Mother, stop," Julian said. "I'm only saying this for your own good," Eleanor pressed on. "Send her home. Give her a bonus if you must, but get her out of here before she starts thinking she belongs. You know how these people are." Clara watched through the crack in the door. She saw Julian rub his temples, his eyes squeezed shut. He nodded. It was a short, sharp nod, a gesture of dismissal, a signal that he was done listening and wanted to end the conversation. But from where Clara stood, it looked like agreement. It looked like capitulation. You know how these people are. The shame hit Clara harder than the cold had the night before. She felt foolish, stupid. She had let herself believe, just for a few hours, that the connection on the rug was real. She had let herself roast marshmallows and laugh and almost kiss a man who lived in a different universe. Eleanor was right. She was the charity case. She was the entertainment for a bored billionaire on a snowy night. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and stinging. She wouldn't let him send her away. She would leave first. She would leave with her dignity intact. "Leo," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Baby, come on. We have to go." "But Mr. Julian said we could have pancakes," Leo protested, looking up from his robot. "We're having pancakes at home," Clara said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "Santa came to our house too, remember? We have to go see what he left." She moved fast. She didn't want to be there when Julian came back. She didn't want to see the pity in his eyes as he handed her an envelope of cash and told her to call a cab. She folded the blankets neatly, because she was efficient, because she was a professional, and gathered their things. She found a piece of Thorne Enterprises stationery on the desk. She clicked a pen, her hand shaking. She wanted to write so much. She wanted to say, "You made me feel safe." She wanted to say, "I saw you." Instead, she wrote, "Thank you for the robot. Merry Christmas, sir." The word "sir" felt like a knife. It was a wall. It was a return to the hierarchy. It was the only way she could protect herself. She propped the note against the silver butter knife on the table. "Come on, Leo," she said, grabbing his hand. They slipped out the side door into the blinding white morning. The air was freezing, but Clara welcomed it. It numbed the ache in her chest. They walked down the long, icy driveway toward the main road to catch a bus, leaving the mansion behind them. 5 minutes later, Julian walked back into the library. "Mother is handled," he said, stepping into the room, a tired smile finally touching his lips. He was ready to apologize for his family. He was ready to ask Clara if she wanted coffee. He was ready to pick up where they left off. "Clara, I wanted to tell you." He stopped. The room was empty. The blankets were folded in a perfect stack. The fire was dead ash. "Clara?" Silence answered him. He walked to the table. He saw the note. He picked it up, reading the 2 sentences. "Merry Christmas, sir." The paper crinkled in his grip. He looked at the empty space on the rug where they had sat. The library felt massive. It felt cold. It felt emptier than it had in 20 years. "Damn it," he whispered. He turned and ran. Not walking. Ran toward the door. Clara's apartment was exactly as she had left it, small, dim, and freezing. The radiator in the corner was hissing aggressively, but the heat seemed to evaporate before it reached the center of the room. The tiny, crooked plastic Christmas tree stood on the coffee table, its tinsel drooping sadly. Compared to the grandeur of the Thorne estate, with its towering spruce and roaring fireplaces, this felt like a shoebox. But it was hers, and right now, it was the only place she could hide. Leo didn't seem to notice the cold. He was sprawled on the worn beige carpet, the silver Centurion robot marching triumphantly across the floor, battling an army of invisible aliens. "Take that!" he shouted, his laughter bouncing off the thin walls. "Mom, look! He has lasers!" "I see, baby," Clara murmured, huddled on the sofa with a mug of lukewarm tea. "That's amazing." She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself, trying to stop the shivering that came from inside. She felt hollowed out. The silence of the apartment was suffocating. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Julian's face in the firelight. She felt the ghost of his hand on hers. She heard him whisper, "I don't feel safe anywhere except right now." "Stupid," she muttered to herself, wiping a tear from her cheek before Leo could see. "You are so stupid, Clara." She had fallen in love with him. It was ridiculous. It was a cliché, but it was true. In the span of 12 hours, she had seen the man behind the billionaire, and she had given him her heart without permission. And now, she was paying the price. Monday was going to be a nightmare. How could she sit outside his office now? How could she bring him coffee and pretend she hadn't almost kissed him? She would probably be fired. Eleanor would insist on it. "Get her out of here," she had said. Julian would probably agree, just to make his life easier. She would lose her job, her income, everything. All because she dared to step out of her lane. The thought made her nauseous. She stood up to take her mug to the kitchen sink, her movements heavy and slow. Bang, bang, bang. The sound exploded through the small apartment. Someone was hammering on her front door. It wasn't a polite, neighborly knock. It was frantic, urgent. Clara froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. "Leo, stay there," she said instinctively. She walked to the door, her heart rate spiking. She peered through the peephole. All she saw was darkness. Someone was standing too close, blocking the light. She unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. "Who is it?" "Clara, open the door." Her breath caught in her throat. She fumbled with the chain, her fingers shaking so hard she almost dropped it. She threw the door open. Julian Thorne stood in her hallway. He looked wild. He was still wearing the dress shirt from the morning, but it was damp with melting snow. He wasn't wearing a coat. His hair was windblown, plastered to his forehead. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving as if he had run all the way from the estate. "Julian?" she gasped. "What? How did you find me? Where is your driver?" "I drove myself," he rasped. "I took the sports car. I don't know the streets. I got lost twice." He stepped forward, not waiting for an invitation. He pushed past the threshold, bringing a gust of freezing air and the scent of winter with him. He filled the room. The apartment, which had felt small before, now felt microscopic. He looked around, his eyes scanning the peeling paint, the mismatched furniture, and the crooked little tree. It was a stark, brutal contrast to the world he came from. But he didn't look at it with judgment, he looked at it with desperation. His eyes landed on her. He looked angry, not at her, but at the situation, at the distance between them. "Why did you leave?" he demanded, his voice filling the space. "I turned around for 5 minutes to deal with my mother, and you vanished. You left a note." "Sir? Really? After last night you call me sir?" I heard her," Clara stammered, backing up until her legs hit the sofa. "I heard what she said. About me being a charity case. About getting rid of me. And I saw you nod, Julian. I saw you agree." "I was nodding to shut her up," Julian shouted, the raw emotion cracking his voice. "I was nodding so she would leave us alone. I was coming back to ask you to stay." Leo stopped playing. He looked up at the shouting man, his eyes wide. Julian noticed the boy. He took a deep, ragged breath, forcing himself to calm down. He ran a hand through his wet hair, snow droplets flying. He turned back to Clara, his expression softening into something pained and open. "I didn't agree with her," he said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "I have never disagreed with anyone more in my life." He took a step toward her. "You think you're a charity case? Clara, look at me. Look at where I am. I'm standing in a 4th-floor walk-up in Queens without a coat because the thought of spending Christmas in that mansion without you was unbearable." Clara stared at him, her heart pounding against her ribs. You came for me?" "I couldn't stay there," he admitted. "The fire went out when you left. Literally. The room felt like a tomb." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers, asking for permission this time. "I don't want to be the boss today," he whispered. "I just want to be the guy who fixes the robot. Can I be him? Please?" Clara looked at his wet shirt, his desperate eyes, and the sheer impossibility of him standing on her frayed carpet. The fear of Monday, the fear of his mother, the fear of her own poverty, it all dissolved. "Yes," she breathed. "You can be him." Julian didn't move to hug her yet. He seemed to need to say something first, to bridge the gap that wealth and fear had built between them. He stood in the center of the cramped living room, water dripping from his cuffs onto the carpet, looking more grounded than she had ever seen him in a boardroom. "I have spent my entire life buying things to fill the silence," Julian said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Cars, houses, companies. I thought if I bought enough comfort, I wouldn't feel the cold. But this morning, when I walked back into that library and saw your note, I realized something terrifying. I could buy the whole world, Clara, and without you in it, it would just be an empty room." Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. He wasn't offering her a raise. He wasn't offering to pay her rent. He was offering her the one thing she thought he was incapable of giving, his vulnerability. "I don't need a buffer," he continued, taking a step closer. "I don't need a secretary to manage my life. I need warmth. I need someone who roasts marshmallows on a hardwood floor. I need someone who tells me the truth." He turned slowly toward Leo, who was watching the scene with wide, curious eyes, holding his robot protectively. Julian smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He reached into his wet pocket and pulled out a small, blister-packed set of batteries. Slowly, deliberately, the billionaire sank to his knees. He lowered himself until he was eye level with the 6-year-old boy. He didn't care about the wet knees of his trousers. "We forgot the spares," Julian said gently, holding the pack out to Leo. "Robots need power to keep going. Otherwise, they just stop." Leo took the batteries, his small fingers brushing Julian's. "Thanks, Mr. Julian." "You're welcome." Julian didn't stand up. Instead, he looked up from his kneeling position, locking eyes with Clara. The angle was significant. He wasn't looking down at her. He was looking up to her. "And I need power too," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "I need my home, Clara. And I think my home is wherever you are." Clara let out a choked sob, half laugh, half cry. She dropped to her knees in front of him, crashing into his space, her hands finding his face. His skin was cold from the snow, but his eyes were burning. "You're crazy," she whispered, stroking the damp hair back from his forehead. "You're absolutely crazy. Put it on my tab," Julian murmured, leaning into her touch as if it were oxygen. The craziness, the rent, the worries, the future. Put it all on my tab, Clara, forever. But not as my employee. I don't want you to work for me. I want you to walk with me. Is that a promotion? She teased through her tears. It's a proposal, he corrected intensely. For a partnership, for a life. He didn't wait for an answer. He closed the distance. The kiss was not explosive. It wasn't the kind of kiss you see in movies with fireworks going off. It was soft. It was safe. It tasted of winter air and relief. It was the feeling of coming in from a storm and finally locking the door against the wind. Julian's arms went around her, pulling her close, burying his face in her neck as if he were trying to absorb her warmth. Clara held him tight, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her chest. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She felt anchored. You? Leo's voice cut through the moment. Are you guys going to mush? Julian pulled back, laughing. A real, loud laugh that filled the tiny apartment. Yes, Leo. We are definitely going to mush. The rest of the day was a blur of messy, imperfect joy. There were no caterers, no crystal glasses, and no silent, judgmental relatives. They ordered pizza because Clara had nothing in the fridge. They sat on the floor, using the coffee table as a dining room. Julian Thorne, a man who owned half the city, ate a slice of pepperoni pizza with one hand while helping Leo stage a battle between the Silver Centurion and a salt shaker with the other. The radiator hissed. The wind rattled the window pane. But the cold didn't matter anymore. The apartment was filled with noise, with laughter, with life. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, painting the snowy city in hues of purple and gold, Julian sat on the sofa with Clara tucked under his arm. Leo had finally crashed, asleep with his head on Julian's lap. Julian looked down at the boy, then at the woman resting against his chest. He looked around the small, cluttered room. He had never felt richer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled receipt from the toy store, the piece of paper that had started it all. He smoothed it out with his thumb, smiling at the total. Best $20 I ever spent, he whispered against her hair, kissing the top of her head. Clara smiled, closing her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing and the quiet hum of her new life beginning. Merry Christmas, Julian, she whispered. Merry Christmas, Clara. And for the first time in his life, he meant it. And that is where our story ends. A single mom who couldn't afford a $20 toy. A billionaire who couldn't afford to feel. And a Christmas Eve that proved the most expensive things in life cost nothing at all. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that home isn't a place but a person, then do something for me. Hit that like button, not for the algorithm, but because stories like this deserve to be found by people who need them. Drop a comment. Tell me, have you ever found home in someone unexpected? I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, join us. Because every week, we tell stories that break you open and put you back together. Turn on notifications, so you never miss a story that stays with you long after the screen goes dark. Thank you for staying until the end. Take care of your heart, and I'll see you in the next one.